Welcome to Conversations with Dr. Skip Mason,
pastor, preacher, historian, author,
teacher, librarian, archivist, world traveler,
collector, family historian, avid reader, and creator of the popular Vanishing Black Atlanta Facebook page.
But a lot of folks who love history.
Most importantly, he's our dad who loves his family and who taught us the importance of our history and having important conversations.
Join him now for this episode of Conversations with Dr. Skip.
Let me say good afternoon to each of you, and thank you so much for joining me on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. And I trust and pray that this finds you in good health and good spirits. Today, we have a very special conversation, a special show honoring, remembering, and reflecting on the life and legacy of someone that was dear to so many of us in the CME Church and across the country. As an esteemed and respected historian, author, and professor. And that, of course, is Dr. Love Henry Whelchel, who passed earlier this week and whose life was celebrated on yesterday down in Hancock County. And I have invited some very special people to come who will offer thoughts of remembrances as we celebrate him, as he is now amongst the ancestors and has become an ancestor. We thought it would be proper to share in this day. And so I greet you in that wonderful name, and I acknowledge our senior bishop, Lawrence L. Reddick, and his wife, and the College of Bishops. I also acknowledge Bishop James B. Walker, the chair of the college, and the chair of the CIT committee, and my bishop, Bishop Thomas Lewis Brown Sr., who is the co-chair and who is one of our special guests today. And my very special thanks to Dr. Teresa Duhart.
With my friends, my close friends, a little story. In 1969, my family and I, we were moved out of Birmingham to Durham, North Carolina. And as we were leaving, I only had a little money. There was a poor Methodist preacher, and my car, my 65 Impella car, it was Chevrolet. The tires were almost flat. The carburetor was not right. The fuel pump was not acting right. There were all kinds of little noises that I didn't like to hear, but I had to get to Durham, North Carolina. And as I was leaving with my wife and my 4 little children, we got about 50 miles outside of Birmingham. And lo and behold, I heard a strange noise in the trunk of my car. I got out the car and went to the back of the car and opened the trunk, and lo and behold, it was a black snake. I believed in Martin Luther King and nonviolence, but just in case, I had a 45. In the glove compartment of my car. So I went back to the glove compartment of my car and got my 45 out and went back to shoot the snake. The snake looked up and said, "Don't shoot. I want to get out of Alabama just like you."
Well, I thought that would be a wonderful and marvelous way to open up this show with one of Dr. Welch's uncanny stories that he shares so often. Let me present to you my very special guest today, who have taken time out of their busy schedule. And I know what Sundays mean to preachers and pastors, but I am so grateful that they are all here. First, I want to present the presiding prelate of the 6th Episcopal District, Bishop Thomas Lewis Brown. I'm so delighted to have you here, Bishop Brown. Let me present to you also Dr. Lisa Allen McLaurin, the Helmar E. Nielsen Associate Professor of Church Music and Worship at the Interdenominational Theological Center. Let me present to you Dr. Jermaine Marshall, professor of church history, pastor of Williams Memorial Institutional Church in Harlem, New York. Let me introduce to you Dr. Paul L. Brown, the president, dean of Phillips School of Theology at the Interdenominational Theological Center. And last but certainly not least, let me introduce to you Dr. Raymond R. Sommerville, the CME Church historian. Good afternoon, scholars. And for this afternoon, I'm going to call you Whelchelites, which is the term that we coined back in the day, because we were all quoting scriptures. I mean, as you all know, his not quoting scriptures, well, scriptures from Whelchel, but quoting quotes because they became so legendary. Let me put one up right now. That I think that everybody is familiar with. And they think that the white man's sugar is sweet. So that was our church history professor, your colleague, your friend. And so Bishop Brown, I'm going to start with you. You're in Savannah. You've had a long weekend. Yesterday you preached the eulogy for Dr. Whelchel. Today, I know you shared with Dr. Thurman and the wonderful people of St. Paul at their 150th anniversary. And so I appreciate your time. But Bishop, reflect on Dr. Whelchel. What does he mean to the CME Church? And share anything that you would like to share at this time, Bishop.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mason, and certainly to my colleagues. It is an honor to be here with you. It is my belief that persons are not of the stature of Dr. Whelchel are not self-made. They are created out of an environment, out of a context that helps to shape who they are. And so, in many respects, Dr. Whelchel is a tribute. Who he became is a tribute to the CME Church itself, its schools, hosted Cobb, Payne College, leadership schools, his other leaders who's embraced him and shaped him. He is indeed a gold mine that has been carved out of the CME Church. And because of that, we celebrate not only him, but we celebrate our church because we have helped produce the likes of a loved Henry Whelchel Jr. And so, among other things, I would say that is premier for me. Still on mute.
Thank you, Bishop. Tell us about your eulogy yesterday that you shared. Some people got a chance to see it. From 1 Corinthians 13, faith, hope, and love. Just talk a little bit about that, if you would, please.
Well, my aim in that eulogy, and of course, eulogies are an effort to try to craft something of what one was in life. As I was wrestling with what I could say in such a short notice, the thought of 1 Corinthians 13 came to me, and in part it was inspired by Rabbi Letter, who has a book out entitled "The Beauty of What Remains." I read his book, and it just, for some reason or other, that thought came to me. And when I looked at 1 Corinthians 13, I thought this is fitting because Dr. Whelchel's departure leaves a lot of us dumbfounded or in grief and just troubled by the fact that such a giant of a man would have to leave us. But I was also grappling with how do you help comfort a family and ourselves in this process. And so I sought to say in that message eulogy that in spite of all that we've lost and certainly all of the accomplishments of Dr. Whelchel, that I would commend to each of us his faith, his hope, and his love based on 1 Corinthians 13. And certainly there's just so much there. I reference a number of his books and passages or statements he made in them. it's just such a rich experience. I spent an evening just going through several of his books just to kind of familiarize myself with them again. And I was just blown out of the waters as I read again passages, read several of his sermons, looked at his book on history and heritage, you name it. It's just, he was a profound mind. And sometimes it takes depth to help us really appreciate the magnitude of somebody. And I think that in the weeks and months and years to come, we will appreciate more who love in the Whelchel was among us.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Amen to that, Bishop. Let me ask Dr. Lisa Allen McLaurin, who is a full professor. Excuse me, madam. Sorry for demoting you.
Listen, I worked hard for that promotion.
Yes, indeed. Full professor at the Interdenominational Theological Center. So would you take a moment, please, to share a little bit about your special relationship that I know you had with Dr. Whelchel?
Yes, indeed. What a gem, what a treasure. Thank you, Dr. Skip, for having me on, and to all of my colleagues. It's so good to see everyone, even in virtual space. Dr. Whelchel was just a giant. All of who he was, cannot be encapsulated simply with the telling of one story. We all have multiple stories, but the thing that I loved about Dr. Whelchel was, as a professor, he demanded excellence, and he presented the material in a way that all students, regardless of learning style, intellectual capabilities, whatever place they were coming from, they could grasp the material. That is a true pedagogue. Not someone who merely knows the information, but who can relay the information in a way that it becomes alive for all who are hearing it, and it makes them want to learn more. He inspired his students not just to retell, if you will, what he was teaching on those well-known Blue Book exams, where he requested an encyclopedic overview of the various denominations. And he inspired so many of them, including some of them on this show tonight, to go further in the research, to go deeper, as well as his colleagues. I used his books, Hell Without Fire, and the History of the African American Churches Making a Way Out of No Way, in the book that I've just published. And he was just amazing, his breadth and depth of knowledge, but the way that he presented it so that it lit a literal fire under you. Thank you, Dr. Skip. Yes, a womanist theology of worship. And I begin with talking about our African liturgical legacy, which Dr. Whelchel spoke about all the time.
Amen.
Yes, indeed. I tell you, you mentioned the Blue Book, which
you don't see that much no more.
You don't see that much anymore, and he was notorious. I'm going to put this copy. This is not my Blue Book, but this is one of my classmates, one Jiku's. And so
I love it. I love it.
The running joke in our class that we took from him, and I was fortunate to take African American church history, and then he taught church history when Dr. Ellenson was out sick. And I said, well, how blessed and lucky can I be? And so the first class was church history. The second class was African American church history all over again. But, his teacher's aide, I tried to find his TA, she was always worried that the students were going to cheat on the exam. And I pulled her over one day and I said, listen, this is a Blue Book, honey.
Right.
How do you cheat?
Cheat
on a Blue Book exam? If somebody went to the restroom, she followed them out, but I tell you, he was so thorough. And his projects were just amazing. And let me shift now to one of his star students, Dr. Jermaine Marshall, a protege of Dr. Whelchel. Dr. Marshall, glad to have you on. Tell us about your relationship with Dr. Whelchel and your experiences with him as well.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Dr. Mason and Bishop Brown and everyone on here. It's such an honor, a privilege to share this space with such great minds and persons who were also disciples of Love Henry Whelchel Jr. Dr. Mason, that is a loaded question. Dr. Whelchel was and is so much to me. I am who I am as a historian, as a professor, as a scholar, um, and even as a pastor. I am who I am because of Love Henry Whelchel Jr. Dr. Whelchel, as I said yesterday at his homegoing celebration, he told me that he would hunt me from the grave if I did not do a PhD in church history. And I'm so grateful to him because I actually did not realize that I had the gift of the caliber, the gift of scholarship that he really helped me to understand that I had. I didn't realize it. And it was because of his investment. It was because of his commitment. It was because of the interest he took in me as a student and as a teaching assistant, as his teaching assistant for many, many years, that I was able to shape and craft the gift of scholarship. And so Dr. Whelchel meant so much to me. He was really my model, not only for scholarship and for teaching, for pedagogy and research, but actually also as a pastor. Dr. Whelchel told me so many stories from his experience as a pastor as an itinerant pastor in the CME Church for 28 years, serving some of our most prominent churches. And so the man, he was just kind of like a Renaissance man. I mean, pastor, scholar, mentor, teacher. And I view my work as a continuation of his legacy. I view my work as work that builds on to what he yes, thank you, Christianity Corrupted. I noticed on his obituary that in his obituary it stated that he was committed to correcting the record on the origins of humanity, on the origins of civilization,
That's right.
on the origins of Christianity. And all of those origins are situated in our motherland, the continent of Africa. And so in my book, which is inspired certainly by the scholarship of Love Henry Whelchel and wouldn't be possible without Love Henry Whelchel, my book attempts to build on his scholarship in revealing and exposing the corruption of white American Christianity, their corruption of the gospel, their corruption of history, their corruption of theology. We see this in the work of Bishop Joseph Johnson, who talks about de-theologizing white Christianity. So Dr. Whelchel, without Dr. Whelchel, I would not be who I am today as a scholar, as a pastor, as a professor.
Let's take a look at this clip for just a second.
One of the myths what he discovered was this. White people believe that black people are people without a past. Black people are people without a past. In other words, are people with no history. What a sad commentary. After white people stole and stripped African people of their identity, their history, their heritage, now they accuse black people as a people without a past. Something that they took away from us. Systemically, identity as our people account was Black history is just taken away from us. We don't like our history. Therefore, Black history has become an orgy of forgetfulness.
Ooh.
Mm-mm-mm.
Ooh. Oh,
Orgy
God.
of forgetfulness.
Only love.
Don't want to hear.
Wow.
An orgy of forgetfulness.
Forgetfulness.
Dean Brown,
Oh, man.
chime in and tell us what Dr. Whelchel meant to the Phillips School of Theology family and the time that he has shared with your students as well.
Well, first of all, I too echo the words of all of my colleagues that have spoken thus far. I am honored to be on this august panel of scholarly minds who are CMEs and doing great work in our Zion. But before I get to his contribution to our only seminary, I should say that I too served as a teaching assistant while I was a student at Phillips School of Theology. I had the honor of working with him while he was teaching at Clark Atlanta, and he allowed me to be his teaching assistant while he was teaching African American history over there. Where do I begin? Let me piggyback on something Dr. McLaurin said. How about I start there? Because she was absolutely spot on correct. I think there are two things that really hurt Dr. Whelchel more than anything. One of them was to see persons, especially CMEs, cheating on tests in his class. I saw him cry after class one day because he told me two students who were CMEs were cheating on his test, and he literally cried. That story stuck with me, and it has stuck with me for years. Not simply because of how he responded, but the fact that he had such a passion to teach our people and to see someone take advantage of that. I think the other thing that really that he was troubled by was that he felt that not enough African American preachers and teachers were writing. He really pressed that in terms of persons in scholarship to write. He pushed that. Now, insofar as what he has done for Phillips, let me just begin by saying this one story. I got a call from him a couple of years ago, and he said, Dean, he would always speak in his gruff, slow voice. How you doing? How's the family? He loved my wife. He just loved Sister Dolores. And then he said, I have a gift that I want to give you. I don't know if you're going to be able to get it, but I really want you to have this. And he gave me 2 cases of all of his written works, donated them to the school. And so when Dr. McLaurin wrote in her excerpt at the ITC about getting his books, we have them. And I totally agree with that. If you don't have at least one of his books in your library, you're missing something. He is truly a treasure of our church.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. Dr. Sommerville, and that was a very excellent segue. As our church historian, place Dr. Whelchel's contributions in context with the CME Church.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Skip, and to my CME colleagues. It's a pleasure to join you and to talk about my mentor. I wasn't a student of Dr. Whelchel, but that first story that you led with reminded me of my journey with him, because I followed him 15 years later from Miles College, from Birmingham, across the mountains to Durham, North Carolina, where I first met him. And even though I had heard of his legendary status as a civil rights activist and pastor in Birmingham, I had not met him until I got to North Carolina as the first year seminarian and later a pastor. And just to sit at his feet for 2 years, soaking up all of his knowledge, hearing his profoundly prophetic preaching. I think the first 6 months I was there, I was in awe of his powerful prophetic preaching. He preached 6 months from the book of Psalms every Sunday. I'd never heard that before. And it was just so profoundly impactful. Let me just share one other story. I met him in his middle years, I would say his mid-career, and when he was becoming a scholar. He got his PhD at Duke when I was there. And there was a providential meeting. It wasn't arranged. It was just providential. The day he defended his dissertation, prior to that grueling hour, 2 hours of questions and answers and defending, he took a restroom break. And I and another CME student at Duke just providentially happened to be in the restroom. And we asked him, Doc, what are you doing here? Because he didn't come on campus every day. And so he said, I'm here to defend my dissertation. We said, what? Today? And so we had a CME prayer meeting.
My God.
In the bathroom, in the restroom at Duke. And he inspired us more than we inspired him. And so later just a couple of hours, he was awarded, he successfully defended the dissertation and was awarded PhD at Duke. And what it meant, for me as a young scholar, and I'm sure Brother Jermaine can identify with this, I had not seen any PhD historians from the CME Church. He was the first CME scholar to earn a PhD in church history. And that inspired me. That inspired me to, years later, to pursue my PhD. I think I may have been the second, Jermaine. Okay. But anyway, so let me put in context what it means for the CME Church. The CME Church has produced a number of great scholars of stature, but L.H. Whelchel must reckon at the top of that pantheon in terms of his production. And he was literally starting out his academic career. He taught at Miles, but on the graduate level, he was in his early to mid 40s. And so he was starting with a running background, and he had been a outstanding, successful pastor for many years. And the thing about him is that even as a pastor, he fully integrated scholarship and prophetic activism in his preaching and his ministry. And so what you saw from him from the pulpit, you saw in the classroom, from the lecture stand.
Absolutely.
And one time we used to joke about it and say, man, Whelchel can't preach like that at Duke. Won't dare get in Duke Chapel and preach like that, hooping and twirling. And Lord knows, he was invited to the chapel for a Black Student Union event in the Duke Chapel. And Whelchel was just as profound and prophetic, and he hooped all he wanted to. Twirl, came down and did his twirl. I said, go ahead, preacher. And that said to me that, you don't have to change your style. just because you're in the presence of white people or academic people. He was himself in all places.
I love
so
it.
He brought an authenticity to the pulpit and a level of acumen, scholarship to the pulpit, and yet he was such a humble, profoundly humble person. Not all of us can attest. The first thing he will ask you, how are you? How's your family?
That's right.
How's your mama? How's
That's
your dad?
right.
And he did that. And so his impact on the CME Church, I never asked him, you know, I thought when I left him at Duke and when he left North Carolina, he was on that trajectory to become a bishop. He was hitting all the Phillips temples in Ohio and I thought he was on that trajectory, but Lord knows he landed in academia, and thank God he did, because I know he would have made a great bishop, but he would have challenged some folk and transformed some stuff. But thank God, because he trained a generation of CME pastors and scholars and on that prophetic in that prophetic tradition. And so that's going to be part of his legacy. But the outstanding scholarship that influenced people like me and Jermaine and other CME and Sister Lisa, it's just unending and profound. And so we owe God a debt of gratitude for the gift of L.H. Whelchel Jr.
Amen. Yes, indeed. Thank you, Dr. Sommerville. His pastor, Reverend Gregory Williams, could not be with us, but I do want to share this. And then Bishop Brown, I want to come back to you, because I think you gave the annual conference a couple of years ago probably one of the most phenomenal treats of a conference when you invited Dr. Whelchel to come and to present and share as a part of the 150th anniversary of the CME Church. So I want you to share a little bit about that. But let me bring Reverend Greg Williams up to share some thoughts.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Skip. I greet my CME Church family and all of our friends. Thank you for allowing me to share this time with you and my personal reflections with being Dr. Love Henry Whelchel's pastor. I'm so thankful that you all thought about me and the Power of Good News Community Church, of which Dr. Larma Whelchel and Dr. Love Whelchel are members. We are so thankful to have laid him to rest and celebrated his life on yesterday. Bishop Thomas Brown preached a yeoman of a sermon. It was a timely homegoing celebration and a powerful eulogy. I wanted to reflect on some of my thoughts as I remember him as a pastor. But my initial relationship with Dr. Whelchel goes back, I believe, to the late 50s. My relationship, I'm going to say that again, my relationship to Dr. Whelchel goes back to the late 50s. No, I was not alive then, but he was a student at the great Hulsey Cobb Institute in Cordele, Georgia, of which my father was a student at Hulsey Cobb, and that was my father's childhood home. Dr. Whelchel would leave class at Hulsey Cobb Institute and walk across the street. I believe it was 14th Street. And they would go into my dad and my grandmother's home. And my grandmother would cook the boys' dinner, the students' dinner. And he told me oftentimes how important those meals were, sitting at my grandmother's table, eating that meal with the rest of the students at Hulsey Cobb Institute. I can remember him saying oftentimes how I remembered that I reminded Dr. Whelchel of my grandmother. My grandmother was gregarious. She was vivacious. She She was in the community. She was no nonsense, and he said that my community work often reminded her of how she engaged her community. Now, this really blessed me because I never met her consciously. I believe I was a baby when she passed away, but it helped me to understand who my grandmother was when he would say these things to me. And so Dr. Whelchel, along with Dr. Helmar Whelchel, were very instrumental in our homeless outreach ministry that our church began. They always made sure they went through their clothing and their blankets and made donations to our homeless outreach ministry. Every time we went out, they would bring bags that they had collected from their neighbors to come to our church so that we can hand them to the homeless. So Dr. Skip, they were not just pew members. Dr. Whelchel was a due member. And then when we transitioned out to Lithonia, Georgia, and merged the churches with Power of Good News CME and Good News CME, Dr. Whelchel and Helmar Whelchel came out, and this was closer to their home in Ellenwood. And I can remember when they would come down that aisle, Dr. Whelchel with his tall self would walk down that aisle slowly and slide into the pew, and I could feel butterflies. I could feel the butterflies begin to move in my stomach. Y'all preachers know that we're always nervous. We just learned how to hide the butterflies, and I was doing a lot of hiding. Not only was my father a regular worshiper when we were in the building, but Dr. Whelchel would be there. So when I think about my preaching moments, having Dr. Whelchel in the pew, I just think about preaching pressure. And there was a lot of pressure having this giant of a pastor, a giant of a preacher who has preached all over the world and had people come from miles around to hear him preach. And now he's in the pew and I'm in the pulpit. And now I've got to figure out what and I don't want to focus on just one person, but he's such a powerful presence that you wonder, what do you have to say that he has not already said or already heard? What do you, and so what him just being present meant, it meant that I had to do some more work. You know, we preachers can go through a lazy phase. We can go through a lazy phase where we just look at a text and pick it up and preach it and hoop it home, get everybody up, sit down, and take up offering. But when Dr. Whelchel was in the room, I had to work. I had to study. I had to pull those old textbooks out of that I had from his class. I had to pull all that stuff out and go back to Tertullian and St. Augustine and Paul Tillich and really begin to re-dig, and it reignited something in me. It reignited a desire to go deeper into the scriptures in that preaching and teaching moment. So he really blessed me with his presence. But not only that, as I finished, Dr. Whelchel, his ministry was encouragement. Yes, he was a great preacher, great pastor. But his spiritual gift was the gift of encouragement. I don't even know if that's in the Bible. But when he called me after church and talked to me, it let me know that I did all right. And the butterflies kind of just went away a little bit. He had a way of even at Hosted Temple, oh Lord, Hosted Temple, amen. Even there, he would encourage me to keep on. You're doing the right thing. You're going in the right direction. And lastly, I asked him one day, why did you join our church? He told me, he said, Brother Williams, everything dead needs to be buried. This church is alive, and he enjoyed the liveliness of our worship experience. I thank you for this time, and I'll leave you with this. I heard a poem, and it said, I heard the angels calling. A powerful oak, a mighty oak has fallen. God bless you, Dr. Whelchel. We love you. Thank you, Dr. Skip, for this time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Reverend Greg, my dear friend. Bishop, you had Dr. Whelchel at your annual conference in Stone Mountain a couple of years ago. And it was just such a blessed, anointed, magical moment because you gave him all the time he needed to share what he needed. Talk about that for you and for us and the 6th Episcopal District, please, sir.
Thank you very much again, Dr. Skip. I think a prelude to that is that I think Dr. Whelchel was the first B. Julian Smith lecturer under my tenure as Dean of Phillips School of Theology. And so my inviting him began there when I was pastoring the Butler Street Church when he and his wife and family moved to Atlanta. I was struggling trying to have revivals in the evening and with a suburban congregation in a downtown facility. The thought came to me to invite him to preach on Sunday morning.
Oh, yeah.
So I chose the month of March, 5 Sundays. And this man preached to us 5 Sundays in a row for an entire month. It was one of the most ingenious things I had ever done as a pastor, to have Dr. Whelchel come and preach an entire month, Sunday after Sunday to us.
My God.
It's an awesome experience to see this man in a pulpit blessing our congregation. But then the annual conference piece, I think Reverend Gregory had something to do with it also. Of inviting him, I think we were in discussion about Dr. Whelchel, and in that discussion, thought it'd be great to have him come to our annual conference and just talk. And as he was, of course, waning in those moments and those years, but it was very obvious that he was still on point, that his passion for the integration of our social, cultural, political life with our theological, religious life was still there. I said on yesterday that here was a man who was not a schizophrenic thinker. He bridged the gap between what y'all call interdisciplinary person. He brought all of those disciplines together in preaching, in teaching, in every aspect of his life. And so I thought it was a great opportunity for us to present a great legend, a great personality, a son of George, of course, to come back and to share with us in his own way. And so that was part of the motivation there to have him come and just greet us with his presence and with what he had to share with us otherwise.
Well, that was truly a blessed moment. I couldn't find the footage for that. I looked for it, but I'm hoping that I can find that, because now these moments that he has been captured on film become extremely priceless. Let's take a look at this before I come back to you.
Well, I think there's a real misconception of the civil rights movement and the impact it had on America and on changing society. We must remember that we would, being 40 or 50, almost 50 years removed from the civil rights movement, it's almost, people think upon it as it being a mass movement, and everybody was involved in the civil rights movement. Well, this is an illusion. It was not. Very few people were involved in the civil rights movement. You take, for instance, a city like Birmingham. I was involved in the Birmingham movement. I was one of the vice president of the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights that was headed by Fred Shellsworth. This was the same organization that invited Dr. King to come to Birmingham in 1963. And there are 400 black churches, or there were 400 black churches in Birmingham, but only 60 black churches were involved in the civil rights movement, on 400. So what I'm saying is, it was not a widespread, it was just a remnant of people involved in the civil rights movement. And to be honest with you, before Dr. King was assassinated, he was losing ground. everybody was turning against Dr. King. I'm not talking about white people, but I'm talking about black people. The NAACP, the Urban League, all of these organizations were turning against him. One reason is because he just wasn't stopping at civil rights and helping black people, but he was against the war in Vietnam.
That's
and
right.
Many people thought he was crazy. They said, well, this is not a civil rights issue. But but being thankful to Dr. King, he saw the relatedness of civil rights and war and justice. He saw that they were all related. But in a sense, really, I hate to say this, and I'm not saying it without sympathy and concern, in a sense, Dr. King's assassination was his salvation. If you know what I mean.
Wow.
Well, that's the kind of truth and power he spoke in class, every class period. So in his church history class, you had to do a historical analysis of a church, whether it was a church that you pastored or a church that you attended. But he wanted you to do a detailed search of that church, the church archives, the history, photographs, cornerstone. And can you imagine all of his students, Jermaine, you may remember that, if all of those documents that his students did over the years were gathered together somewhere, what a remarkable collection, historical collection that would be for any church archives. Then, of course, we had to recreate some historical moment within the church. And the recreation could be anything historical. So Ian Gibson and I and some others, we recreated the founding of the CME Church. And we were in costume. You know, the more elaborate was, the better you got a better grade and great comments. And so he just really helped to make history come alive. I'm going to close with a short lecture of his when we get to the end. But I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to just share any closing final thoughts. I wanted to keep this to an hour if possible, but I thought that it was absolutely necessary that I take this time to invite those to share in a public display our love and appreciation. We continue to pray for Mrs. Whelchel, of course, his children and his grandchildren, but I hope in some small way that they know the impact that Dr. Whelchel had on so many people, so many students, so many church members, etc. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Lisa. Then I'll go to Dr. Jermaine, Dr. Brown, Dr. Sommerville, and then Bishop. I'll let you have the closing thoughts, if you will. Dr. Lisa, give me your final thoughts on Dr. Whelchel.
Thank you, Dr. Skip. All I can say is that we have a responsibility to continue to do the work that Dr. Whelchel and others began, continued in their work. One of the things that I appreciate most about Dr. Whelchel was he did not bite his tongue. He said things in a very loving, almost sometimes conciliatory way, but he was very serious and he would not shirk back. I remember faculty meetings, because see, all of that you all were getting in classes, he was given the same thing in faculty meetings. And we had colleagues who wanted to, in their own ways, make light or make fun in a way, or cast disparaging remarks at the Black church or the history thereof. Dr. Whelchel didn't brook that. Oh no, he would get them straight immediately. And remind us all that if it weren't for the Black church, there would be no ITC. And there wouldn't be many of us. And so we all have all of us who are committed to the Black church, committed to the church universal, because Dr. Whelchel said Black church history is church history, because it came out of Africa. And so we have a responsibility to continue that work, to continue his legacy, to keep calling his name. That's how we keep our elders alive. That's how we keep our ancestors alive. And so that's the work I'm called and we are called to do. So let's do it.
And as we close, because you and Jermaine were initially scheduled to be my guests today, to talk about your publications. And as I said to you, as I shifted the show, that I could think of no greater testament to Dr. Whelchel than the books that you two have published in this season. And tell us where the book can be purchased, and anything else that you want us to know about your new book.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Womanist Theology of Worship, Liturgy, Justice, and Communal Righteousness came out of the COFA lecture that I did. Actually, the first one I did back in 2007, Liturgy, Justice, and the Future of the Black Church, and the one that I gave last year, A Womanist Theology of Worship, where I am looking at the liturgical history of the Black church and how it has been impacted by white supremacy, and how we can take steps to uproot and dismantle the effects of white supremacy. Even some of the hymns that we love so well that promise that Jesus' blood will wash us whiter than snow. Dr. Whelchel will tell you that's a product of the Great Awakening, is that evangelical theology, that everything Black is evil. And so I plumb the depths of that in my book. It can be purchased at Orbis Books, which is the publisher, or Amazon or other booksellers.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Jermaine, give us your closing thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Mason and Bishop Brown, again, colleagues. This is just an honor to share in this format with you all. I would just echo what Dr. Alan McLaurin expressed. We've got to continue the legacy and the work that Dr. Whelchel initiated, historically and theologically. We, especially now, more now than ever, we are living in a very critical time in which we have persons such as John MacArthur and this very right-wing evangelical tradition that's attempting, that's not attempting, they are suggesting that social justice is antithetical to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it is not only heretical, it's not only apostasy. I told some of them, you have given yourself over to a reprobated mind. And yeah, I'm a product of Whelchel, so I'm just going to tell you what I think. And to me, to think such a suggestion, I think you are beyond the hope of salvation. You can't be saved. I mean, that is just, I mean, it's asinine. It's just, I don't know how you can conclude that social justice is antithetical to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I'm the new boogeyman for white evangelicals, because I tell them, you all sleep with Paul in the sheets and want to claim Jesus in the streets. But anyway, but so that's the importance of us continuing the legacy of Dr. Whelchel. Dr. Whelchel, as I said at his homegoing celebration yesterday, I center my ministry, my academic ministry, my pastoral ministry on his saying. He always said, our history, that's African American history, is too painful to remember and too dangerous to forget. And that is what these, unfortunately, what these white evangelicals, and I really shouldn't say white evangelicals, unfortunately, some of our folk have got caught up into this foolishness. And that's what this anti-critical race theory, this anti-wokeness movement is all about. It's an attempt to try to make us come to this conclusion that slavery never happened, that Jim Crow never happened, that the Civil War wasn't about slavery, that this country was not founded on racist premises, and it's not a racist country, and there's no white privilege. And so in my book, Christianity Corrupted, what I do is I talk about the theological scandal of white American Christianity. Christianity, that's why it's entitled Christianity Corrupted: The Scandal of White Supremacy. And I start with the Enlightenment theories of race, looking at the enlightened thinkers and how they equate whiteness with perfection and blackness with evil, and I talk about the Puritanism, which had a theology of white superiority, Anglicanism, which possessed a theology of white privilege. Then I talk about how this theological scandal continues through the development of white American fundamentalism, and also this attempt through the curse of Ham myth, you all know about that, to suggest that slavery was the providential will of God, because of the curse of Ham, which is an erroneous notion. And I bring it forward, and I'm doing this very quickly, I bring it forward to what I call well, I look at the white American fundamentalists, and I talk about Dwight Moody and Billy Graham, yes, and their white supremacy, yes, and I deal with what I call the modern white Christian supremacy, which is this new cult of Donald Trump. And it's dangerous. And the black church, unfortunately, we've been too silent on this. And these white evangelicals are controlling the narrative. And so there's a burden on me. I got a burden from the Lord that we need to respond to this theologically. We need to respond as Dr. King responded and the civil rights movement responded. We need to respond like the social black gospelers, Benjamin Mays and Howard Thurman. We need to respond like we see Black Lives Matter responding, and they're not even connected to nobody's church. They are responding. The black church needs to respond to this theological scandal, this theological corruption of the Christian faith.
Well, Whelchel lives, Whelchel lives, Whelchel lives. Thank you so much, Dr. Marshall. Dean Brown, give us your closing thoughts. And I don't know whether you mentioned or not in the first segment about the award that you gave. Dr. Marshall. Did you mention that?
No, I was going to say a brief word about that. And again, thank you, Dr. Mason, for this opportunity. And thank you, colleagues, for your insights and certainly your comments. I'm sitting here listening to Dr. Allen and Dr. Marshall just now. And the first thing that came to my mind, Bishop and Dr. Sommerville, is that the damage that the daughters of the Confederacy has done to this country is absolutely astonishing. When you think about the narrative that they created, that is still reaping benefits and damage against our culture at the same time. It's just absolutely astonishing.
Lost cause religion.
Exactly. I wrote down two things, Dr. Mason. Well, first of all, let me tell everybody, in case you don't know, what Dr. Mason is referring to. For those who don't know, every year I ask our students to honor a faculty person. And we try to give the faculty person some sort of acknowledgement, a gift or whatever. And I had a long time. I had been knowing Dr. Whelchel for years, as many of you have been knowing him. And we've always talked. And one of the things he used to tell me is that he'd never been on a boat because for obvious reasons, he didn't want to get on no boat because he didn't anyway. So when the students selected him a couple of years ago for Teacher of the Year, I suggested that we get him and his wife a cruise. So we purchased a cruise for him. And again, that was the second time I'd ever seen him cry, because we had a big dinner and we presented it to him and his wife was there and they were just overwhelmed. And it was a wonderful, wonderful time in the history of Phillips School of Theology. And he told me it was the best time that he had had in a long time. But Dr. Mason, there were two things that I jotted down in terms of a closing thought. One of them was private moments. When you have an opportunity to share with someone of the caliber of a Dr. Whelchel, and you have an opportunity to have a private moment with him, take notes. We would drive. I remember we were at a function and his son couldn't come and get him, so he asked me to drive him home. And if anybody knows, where Dr. Whelchel lives a good distance from downtown Atlanta. And we drove, and when we got to his home area, he said, he was telling me where to go to this restaurant. And we sat down, and of course, Dr. Whelchel doesn't eat meat. For those of you that know, he had him a vegetable plate with some cornbread. And we sat there literally in that restaurant until they were getting ready to close. And he was just unloading wisdom and gems. And it was just private, precious moments that I will always cherish. The second thing is his relationship with Bishop Thomas Lanier Hoyt Jr. Bishop Hoyt was the first Black PhD from Duke to get a PhD in New Testament religion. And he and Dr. Whelchel, obvious reasons, were very, very close. And when Bishop Hoyt passed away, and Bishop Brown, you probably remember this, we had several memorial tributes, the first of which was in Washington, D.C., Dr. Mason, because we felt we couldn't fit everybody in Israel, which is the largest church in the D.C. area. We had it at the Howard University Camden Auditorium. And the program was loaded. One of the keynote speakers was the presiding prelate of the Church of God in Christ at the time. I can't, his name escapes me as I'm sitting here, but he came and he spoke, but Dr. Whelchel was on the program to give remarks. And the presiding officer was Bishop James Walker. And Bishop Walker was emphasizing to everybody, you only have 2 minutes. Well, you give Dr. Love Henry Whelchel a microphone, and in 2 minutes, you're going to church. Literally. Before that 2 minutes was up, Bishop Brown can vouch for this. Everybody in that auditorium was on their feet. To see that 70-plus-year-old man tune up and turn around like he normally does, it was just absolutely amazing. And lastly, I'll say this. Shortly after becoming dean, and of course, my mentors, Bishop Hoyt, we buried him in the cemetery over there off Martin Luther King. Dr. Whelchel called me one day and said, I want to go see my friend. And so we called OC and Doria and Thomas, and we all met at the cemetery. And we all just talked to Bishop Hoyt. And Dr. Whelchel gave some words, and it was one of the most moving moments that I've had since I've been dean. And I'll leave you all with this right here. I said this in some remarks. When a tree falls in a forest, there are few people who really hear it. When a person of this caliber passes away, the reverberations of his death will go on for years. Thank you, Dr. Mason, for your archival footage. I can't wait to see what else you have, my brother. God bless you.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Dean. Dr. Sommerville, your closing thoughts, please.
Yes, thank you. I was just thinking this has been a very difficult month for CME Church, and the losses and the loss of a giant like Dr. Whelchel. But for us in academia, and particularly in Black church history, we also are mourning the loss of Professor Albert Raboteau, great scholar who wrote classic book that many of us use in our classes, Slave
Religion. That's right. I got it here somewhere.
Dr. Whelchel belongs in that same category.
Absolutely.
Of Albert Raboteau. Yes, that's the book. So we lost two great historians. Dr. Whelchel was just not a historian of the CME Church or the Black Church, but the Church Universal, and he belonged to that paradigm that I like to refer to as a liberationist paradigm of historiography, of church historiography, that does what Dr. Marshall does, is decenter European, Eurocentric, American history, Christianity, and to put Africa and other global Christianities in their rightful place And so he belonged to part of that new new paradigm of global historical scholarship that valorizes Africa and African American traditions and the African diaspora. So we have to acknowledge that he was just not. We gave him to the world. The CME Church produced a L.H. Whelchel, but he is a scholar, a global scholar that we acknowledge and revere, and we should treasure our own.
Amen.
Let me close with, in his first book, My Chains Fell Off, he wrote me this in this note, and I'm going to address it not to myself or to my family, but address it to the CME Church. And in that note, he wrote, "No struggle, no progress. Hang tough and keep the faith. We keep you in our prayers and best wishes. L.H. Whelchel."
Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful. Bishop Brown, would you give us your closing thoughts, please?
Yes, thank you again, and certainly to these great minds who joined us here this afternoon. Just want to start by saying, lifting up two sermons I remember him preaching. One was in the ITC chapel, entitled "The Church is Like a Nail." He walked in the pulpit with a nail in his hand and preached profoundly and inspired us to no end by talking about the head of the nail as the head of the church, the body of the nail, and then the point of the nail as the mission of the church going forward. Just an awesome. I hope that somebody has that on video. Then I heard him at Westminster Street Church. I believe it was one of our Saturday meetings or something that probably Elder Woodfork had. It was entitled, he used the song "Wake Up Everybody, No More Sleeping in Bed,
No more backward thinking."
And oh my goodness, he talked about how we keep ourselves asleep and denying the truth of our history and our heritage.
My God.
And use that song to say it's time to wake up everybody.
My God.
Just inimically to Love Henry Whelchel Sr. I say again that Love Henry Whelchel is a tribute to the CME Church.
Praise God.
But also to the CME school of Hosacob and Payne College. He is no accident. He is a creation of heaven and the CME Church and beyond. And as we remember him, I believe he would say to us, be proud of your church, your heritage, your schools. Do not dismiss. They may not appear as promising as other institutions are, but our schools shape us in a way that no others do. Be proud of who you are, where you come from, and who has shaped you along the way. I think that he will go down in history as one of the unique personalities who was able to bridge theology, social justice, and the whole of life in a way that few do. The other thing that made him significant to the ITC was that he was one of the few professors who had the kind of tenure in the pulpit. There are just some things you can't teach that you have not experienced. Love Henry Whelchel had gone through the storms, dealing with being a pastor. He knew the ins and outs of that life, and yet he continued to rise above that. Finally, I would say this, that every institution that produces a son like Love Henry Whelchel has something of a love-hate relationship. One of the reasons Dr. Sommerville, maybe Dr. Whelchel was not a bishop, was because he didn't fit in the mold like some of us do. He created tension with a PhD, hooping like he did, squatting like he did, even in Duke Chapel.
Yeah.
That is out of the norm. And so I think in some ways, some of us had challenges because he did not fit the mold totally.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's the price people pay.
Yeah.
For being uniquely themselves.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, Bishop, that's something. That is something.
Wow.
Well, listen, I am grateful. We are grateful for the time that you have shared with us, and for those of us who had the pleasure and the honor of sitting at Dr. Whelchel's feet. Now, those who know me know that I'm going to have my camera and I'm going to take a picture. And so every time I saw Dr. Whelchel, I took me a selfie. That I did not know that I would be using for an occasion such as that.
Yeah.
But like you, Dr. Sommerville, I pulled out my book that Dr. Whelchel, Hell Without Fire. And he simply said to Reverend Skip Mason, who is a scholar, a friend, and a brother in Christ, love H. Whelchel. This means more to me now than it did when he signed it, and we shall always be grateful for him. I found a clip, so hey, give me 5 minutes and I'll let you go. But this is Dr. Whelchel moderating a C. Eric Lincoln panel, and the panelists, well, let me just say, C. Eric Lincoln, Dr. Anna Harbin Grant, and John Hope Franklin. Just take a quick look.
In the world did you get
Important,
this?
and we have had a marvelous forum. We thank you for your participation. We thank you for sharing with us. This has been a marvelous day, and the day is really not over because we do have a book signing party directly across the street at Soul Source Bookstore. You will have an opportunity to collaborate with our panelists, and we just thank you. Actually, because of your cooperation and your support, you have made it very easy on the Department of Religion and Philosophy in cooperation with the School of Arts and Sciences in this wonderful 10th anniversary of the C. Eric Lincoln Lectureship. You are certainly our community. We love you. You're great people. And as we leave, remember, together we stick, and divided we'll stop. God bless you. We'll go directly across the street to the Soul Source Bookstore now, please. Thank you so much.
Wow.
And that's something.
Wow, Dr. Mason, Dr. Lincoln was the commencement speaker when I graduated.
From ITC.
That's correct.
Oh my goodness! Wow, that is incredible. Let me say this before we go: to remember that this is Breast Cancer Awareness and Domestic Violence Awareness, and we hope that pastors, preachers, teachers, lay are bringing attention to that. Dr. Brown, you have a conference for our wonderful school coming up. I'm going to bring you back on. So you can tell us about that program.
Thank you so much, Doc. Thank you so much.
Course, we have the Women's Missionary Council in February. We are looking forward to the General Conference. As we say on this show, we are on the road to Cincinnati in 2022. And I also want to share that on this coming Tuesday, General Secretary Evangelism and Missions Leon Moore will present See Me Grow. The guest speaker is our good friend and brother, Reverend Gregory Williams, on church planting. And on next Sunday, my special guest will be our General Secretary of Personnel Services, Dr. Tyrone Davis, who will be answering questions and dispelling myths and rumors and legends and all with regards to personnel service. And
rumors. Oh my goodness.
We are looking forward. Let's see if I can pull that up to the 3 days of celebration for the installation of the 11th president of the Interdenominational Theological Center, President Matthew Williams. So we are excited about that. And And so we're going to give Dr. Whelchel the final words. God bless you all. Thank you so much.
Dr. Mason, if I
yes,
may,
Dr. Marshall.
I think I failed to say my book can be purchased also.
You got to say that, brother. Yes.
It's also published as with Dr. Lisa Allen McLaurin, but we both publish with Orbis. It's that great publishing company. Yeah. They publish all of James Cone's stuff, by the way. And it can also be purchased at Amazon, Orbis Books, and other bookstores. So
absolutely. And I'm looking forward to getting my copies of these two.
Absolutely. I want mine signed by both of them.
To the literature. Thank you all. And at this time, Dr. Love Henry Whelchel, and I think it may have been Dr. Lisa Allen McLaurin, who would, when she would ever post about Dr. Whelchel, she would do hashtag his name is love. And so we just thank God for Dr. Whelchel and our love to his family at this time, and my appreciation to all of you.
Bless you. Thank you.
These are the passages that resonate. Jesus, see, people like us is the kind of people that Jesus hung out with.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
That's right. You know? Or was it Howard Thurman wrote the book Jesus and the
Disinherited. Yeah.
James Cone wrote a book, God of the oppressed. This was Jesus. See, we're the kind of people that were Jesus crowd.
Come on now.
We're the kind of people that Jesus said, you're the salt of the earth.
Yeah.
You're the light of the world.
Yeah.